Throughout history, mighty empires have risen to unimaginable heights, only to crumble into the dust of forgotten eras. From the grandeur of Rome to the economic might of the 20th century superpowers, the story has always been the same. But what causes these collapses? What are the warning signs that turn prosperity into precarity? And more importantly, what should the United States be watching out for today? We are at a crossroads. The economic landscape is shifting under our feet, and the patterns we see now mirror those that preceded the downfall of the greatest empires in history. This is what always happens before an empire collapses.
Are you paying attention?
It's no secret that the United States is facing growing uncertainty. Countries around the world are moving away from the US dollar. Global alliances are shifting, and fear is rising, especially here at home. Will the dollar collapse? Is the economy on the verge of a meltdown? How bad is the national debt, and just how long can the US continue as the world's dominant superpower? In this video, I'll break down the rise and fall of history's greatest empires, explore the common warning signs of decline, and examine exactly where the United States stands today, especially relative to China. And at the end of this video, I'll discuss what you can do to protect yourself from the inevitable. Because history tells us one undeniable truth: every great empire collapses. But if you understand the signs, you can position yourself to thrive no matter what happens. Before we dive in, if you want to stay ahead financially and understand the forces shaping our world, be sure to hit the subscribe button and like this video. That way, more people like you can stay informed. Now, let's begin with the most recent shifts in global power and what they mean for the future of the US.
The shifting world order.
A lot of the insights in this video come from extensive research, including Ray Dalio's book The Changing World Order. If you're not familiar with Dalio, he's one of the most respected economic thinkers in the world today. While I agree with many of his conclusions, I've also conducted independent research using scholarly sources and historical comparisons. Over the past several hundred years, we've seen dominant world powers rise and fall. The Netherlands once ruled global trade, only to be replaced by the British Empire. After World War II, the United States emerged as the world's preeminent superpower, and for decades, it has maintained its dominance through military strength, economic influence, and, perhaps most importantly, its status as the world's reserve currency. But now, the US is facing signs of decline, and China is rapidly rising. Take a look at this chart from Dalio's research. It clearly shows that every empire follows a cycle. First, there's the rise, marked by economic growth, innovation, and expanding global influence. Then comes the peak, where wealth gaps widen, debt builds up, and political divisions emerge. Finally, there's the decline, marked by financial crises, social unrest, and external pressures. Does this sound familiar? Because right now, the US is showing many of these warning signs. The 5 common causes of empire collapse. Through my research, I identified 5 key factors that contribute to the collapse of superpowers. While some sources list 7, 10, or even 15 reasons, these 5 consistently appear throughout history.
They are: economic decline,
military overreach, political instability and corruption, internal strife and rebellion, external pressures and competition. These factors have been present in the downfall of every major empire, from Rome to the British Empire to modern superpowers. The patterns are clear. When an empire struggles economically, overspends on its military, faces political turmoil, deals with civil unrest, and encounters growing external threats, its downfall becomes inevitable. A closer examination of history shows that no single event causes an empire's collapse. Instead, it is a slow, compounding process where these 5 elements feed into each other. Economic decline weakens military capabilities, corruption undermines governance, internal divisions make a nation vulnerable, and external forces take advantage of these weaknesses. Now, let's take a deeper look at each of these, starting with the economic warning signs that have always preceded empire collapse. 1. Economic decline, the root of collapse. History shows that empires begin to crumble when they fall into financial mismanagement. Economic decline is often the first and most telling sign of an empire's impending collapse. There are 3 major indicators of economic decline: excessive debt and financial instability, loss of competitive advantage and economic stagnation, rising inequality and social unrest. When an empire overspends and accumulates unsustainable levels of debt, its economic foundation weakens. Excessive borrowing to fund wars, welfare programs, or large-scale infrastructure projects without proper revenue generation leads to financial instability. When debt surpasses an empire's ability to repay it, inflation, currency devaluation, and economic crises follow. The British Empire is a prime example of this. After engaging in 2 costly world wars, it faced enormous financial strain. The UK borrowed heavily to finance its war efforts, and by the time World War II ended, it was deeply in debt. The economic burden weakened Britain's global influence, and as its colonies gained independence, its economic dominance rapidly declined. Similarly, the Netherlands lost its competitive edge due to rising competition from England and France. The high costs of maintaining its vast trade empire, combined with economic shifts in Europe, made it difficult for the Dutch to sustain their global influence. Over time, their economic power faded, and the Netherlands was overtaken by stronger, more industrialized economies. Today, we see alarming signs of economic strain in the United States. The national debt has skyrocketed, surpassing $34 trillion, with annual deficits continuing to grow. Inflation and interest rates remain high, making it harder for businesses and consumers to thrive. Meanwhile, wealth inequality has reached historic levels, with the richest Americans controlling an unprecedented share of the country's wealth. As economic power shifts globally, the question remains: how long can this last before the system buckles under pressure? 2. Military overreach, the empire killer. Every collapsing empire overextends itself militarily. While a strong military is essential for maintaining global influence, excessive expansion and prolonged conflicts often lead to economic exhaustion and political instability. Empires that try to control too much territory eventually find themselves struggling to sustain their dominance. Historical examples of military overreach. Rome is one of the most well-known examples of military overextension. The empire constantly expanded its borders through relentless military campaigns, which drained its resources and stretched its legions thin. Eventually, Rome could no longer afford to maintain its vast territories, and its weakened defenses allowed invasions from barbarian tribes, contributing to its collapse. The British Empire followed a similar pattern. At its peak, Britain controlled nearly a quarter of the world's landmass. However, maintaining such a massive empire required extensive military presence, which became increasingly unsustainable, especially after World War II. The financial burden of defending its colonies, along with rising resistance movements, forced Britain to retreat from its imperial ambitions. The Netherlands suffered from military overreach as well. While it was a dominant naval power in the 17th century, its constant wars against England and France drained its economy. As a result, the Dutch lost their global influence and were eventually overshadowed by emerging European powers. Today, the United States is experiencing similar challenges. It is the world's most powerful military force, but at an enormous cost. The US maintains over 750 military bases in over 80 countries, requiring a vast amount of funding and logistical support. Trillions have been spent on wars in the Middle East, with little strategic benefit. However, military overreach isn't just about financial strain, it's also about stretching influence too thin. As the US tries to maintain dominance across multiple global fronts, it risks becoming vulnerable to both external threats, rising competitors like China and Russia, and internal instability, economic pressure, political divisions, and growing anti-war sentiment. If history is any guide, no empire can sustain such military expansion forever. 3. Political instability and corruption. A major warning sign of an empire's decline is the erosion of political stability. When governments become paralyzed by division, corruption runs rampant, and institutions lose their legitimacy, an empire begins to collapse from within. Once people lose faith in their leaders and institutions, the system becomes fragile, and social cohesion starts to break down. Historical examples of political instability and corruption. The Roman Empire suffered from extreme political corruption in its later years. Emperors were frequently assassinated, bribery and nepotism were common, and rival factions vied for power. Rome's Senate, once a respected institution, became ineffective as military leaders and corrupt officials seized control. This internal dysfunction made Rome vulnerable to external threats and hastened its fall. The British Empire faced severe political instability after World War II. The financial cost of the war had weakened Britain, and its ability to manage both domestic affairs and its vast colonial empire dwindled. Political leaders struggled to balance post-war recovery efforts while dealing with growing independence movements in India, Africa, and the Caribbean. The government's inability to maintain control ultimately led to the rapid decolonization of the empire. The United States today exhibits many of the same warning signs. Political polarization is at an all-time high, with the country split nearly 50-50 along ideological lines. Congress is often gridlocked, unable to pass meaningful legislation due to partisan conflict. Trust in government institutions, from the presidency to the Supreme Court, has eroded significantly. At the same time, scandals, corporate lobbying, and financial corruption have further fueled public distrust. Political instability doesn't just weaken a nation internally, it makes it vulnerable to external pressures. A divided empire cannot effectively respond to economic crises, global competition, or military threats. If the political system continues to fracture, history suggests that collapse may be inevitable. 4. Internal strife and rebellion. A nation cannot survive long when its people turn against each other. Throughout history, empires have crumbled when internal conflicts, whether driven by economic hardship, political division, or social injustice, reach a boiling point. Once the gap between the ruling elite and the general population becomes too vast, rebellion and unrest inevitably follow. Historical examples of internal strife and rebellion. The Roman Empire was plagued by deep economic and social divisions. As the wealthiest elite hoarded resources, the common people suffered. High taxes, inflation, and widespread poverty led to revolts, such as the infamous Spartacus slave rebellion. Over time, Rome's inability to address these internal tensions contributed to its downfall. The British Empire experienced significant unrest, particularly in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Industrialization led to massive income inequality, poor working conditions, and labor strikes. Meanwhile, colonial subjects across India, Africa, and Ireland rebelled against British rule. The empire's inability to manage both domestic and colonial unrest weakened its global influence and accelerated its decline. The United States today faces growing internal strife, with rising economic inequality, racial and social tensions, and increasing distrust in institutions. Mass protests, riots, and ideological extremism have become more common in recent years. When combined with economic struggles and political instability, this internal division creates a dangerous environment, one that historically leads to empire collapse. If history teaches us anything, it's that empires fall when their own people no longer believe in the system. Internal strife weakens a nation from within, making it easier for external pressures to push it over the edge. The key question now is, can the US resolve these tensions before they reach a breaking point? 5. External pressures and competition. No empire exists in a vacuum. As one superpower weakens, another inevitably rises to take its place. Throughout history, external pressures, whether from military rivals, economic competitors, or emerging global powers, have contributed to the downfall of once mighty empires. Historical examples of external competition. The Roman Empire struggled against waves of barbarian invasions. Germanic tribes, the Huns, and other external forces took advantage of Rome's internal weaknesses, ultimately leading to its fall in 476 AD. The Netherlands, once a dominant maritime and economic power in the 17th century, gradually lost its position due to competition from England and France. As its military and economic strength declined, it could no longer compete in global trade or maintain its vast colonial empire. The British Empire, once the world's greatest power, was gradually overtaken by the United States. After two costly world wars, Britain found itself economically and militarily exhausted, while the US emerged as the dominant global superpower. The US and the rise of China. Today, America faces a new challenger, China. With a rapidly growing economy, technological advancements, and military expansion, China is positioning itself as the next global superpower. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, China is securing trade alliances and expanding its influence across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Meanwhile, the US is dealing with economic struggles, political division, and military overreach. As China rises, America's ability to maintain global dominance is increasingly in question. Will history repeat itself? If the US continues to decline while China grows stronger, we could be witnessing the next great shift in global power. What happens next? So, where does this leave the United States? Are we on the brink of collapse? The answer isn't so simple, but it's clear. The path ahead depends on the decisions we make today. While collapse is not inevitable, if history has taught us anything, it's that empires that ignore warning signs often pay a heavy price. The good news is that the US has the opportunity to correct its course, but it will require significant changes. What needs to happen for the US to avoid collapse? Addressing the debt crisis, the US must take serious steps to rein in its national debt. The growing deficit is unsustainable, and if left unchecked, it could lead to hyperinflation, currency devaluation, and financial instability. Cutting unnecessary spending, reforming entitlement programs, and reducing tax loopholes would be a good start. Reducing military overreach. The US must also reassess its global military presence. Overextension has drained resources, and focusing on domestic priorities could free up capital for investment in infrastructure, education, and technology. areas that will help boost long-term growth. Rebuilding trust in government institutions. The political polarization we see today is a serious threat to national unity. Repairing trust in institutions requires transparency, accountability, and a commitment to bipartisan solutions. Rebuilding the social contract with citizens should be a priority. Fostering economic innovation and growth. Instead of relying on outdated industries, the U.S. needs to invest in cutting-edge technologies like AI, green energy, and biotechnology. Innovation will be the key to maintaining a competitive edge in the global economy. The real danger: ignoring the signs. The real risk to the United States is not that collapse is inevitable, but that we may ignore the warning signs and continue down the same path. If we don't take immediate action to address these structural issues, we risk slipping into a long-term decline, where opportunities for recovery diminish.
The question remains, are we paying attention?
Will we rise to the challenge, or will we be content to ignore the inevitable consequences of inaction? The clock is ticking, and only time will tell. If you're interested in learning how to protect yourself financially in uncertain times, be sure to watch my next video, where I'll break down the best strategies for securing your wealth in an unstable world. And if you found this video valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.